Hi again then guys, and welcome to of course another car review from GT Sport 1.50, and this time we're taking a look at a car which I had actually forgotten was in Gran Turismo at all. It's not a car I use that much. Of course I did review it in GT6, but beyond that, just wasn't one of my go-to vehicles. Even in the aftermarket category, there are so many cars that I would pick before this in GT6 racing. Probably number one for me was the HPA Golf, such a sleeper car. Often I would get called a hacker because of how quick it was. This one though, it was good, but it didn't feel entirely necessary in that game, whereas in a game like this, aftermarket cars stand out quite a lot. Stuff like the Amuse S2000 for instance, the Time Attack Subaru, the crazy BRZ drift car, they do stand out a lot more. Now this car from, I believe, RE Amemiya, as I was corrected the other day from saying RE Amemiya, this RX-7, the FD3S as they call it, is definitely an iconic tuner car, an iconic aftermarket car, and for good reason. Of course, the FD is already a brilliant car. It's my second favourite JDM car, possibly ever, although would you classify K cars as JDM? That's probably an entirely different discussion, but I do love me some K cars. However, the point is, I love the FD RX-7. This one takes everything that's already good about that car and makes it better. So it can't exactly be a bad thing in any way. And it's not. This is a brilliant machine. Now in terms of the spec, it is improved over the RX-7, but it's not crazy. And I think that was a smart choice to make, because when you've got something that's already as good as that car is, in sports car terms of course, you don't need to necessarily try and make it into a supercar for it to get the point across to customers that your brand is capable. And of course, if you're looking for top tier RX-7 performance, you can still look to RE Amemiya just to the racing side with the Aspara-Drink RX-7 JGTC cars, which are brilliant. But getting back to the specs on this one in particular, of course it's still a rotary. It would be sacrilege if it wasn't. A 2-rotor in particular, 654x2, so roughly a 1.3 litre if you're being conservative about it. 366 horsepower, which as I said, not too crazy. It's not even 100 horsepower more than the normal one. 346 pound-feet of torque though, which is very nice, especially for a smaller capacity engine. Of course, turbo aspirated, and it's pretty light, 1240 kilos, which is incidentally exactly the same as the new Toyota 86, which arrived in this same pack. And when you think of it that way, I think that actually makes this car sound even more impressive. If it's as light as what many people consider to be this small, simple, lightweight sports coupe, well, for this with way more power to be the same weight, it's a pretty good sign. Now, this car is dead focused on cornering. And again, it's one of the reasons why it doesn't come with like 640 horsepower straight out of the box. It doesn't need it. And one of the great things about that is when you've got a car that's as good, as capable, and as fast as this is, but it's not stupidly powerful, you can easily tune this thing, or detune this thing more accurately, into lower classes. You can detune this car to N300. Now I can't recall at the moment if you can go even lower than that. I don't think you can quite get it into N200, but you've got at least N300 capability very easily, of course N400, and even a little bit beyond as well. And that, for JDM fans, is fantastic news, because the RX-7 is already great in those classes. Not necessarily the best thing out there, but very, very good. This being so much more track focused, with more downforce, more focused suspension even without any tuning, and you can just immediately feel how much more honed in this is on the track than a regular RX-7 is, as great as it already is, that this could easily be potentially a new OP contender around N300, something which could genuinely take on your Porsche GT3s and other cars which would typically dominate those kind of categories. And even though I love the 911 GT3s for how good they are, I'm all for seeing some new contenders get in there. They have been dominating for quite some time, so why not allow something new to take a bit of the spotlight? And this one deserves it, I think. It's a great car. The handling is spot on. It's got maybe a little bit of looseness there that you might still consider RX-7-esque, but the difference between this and the street car is night and day. The regular car is a lot of fun, it's tail happy, it's a pure sports car experience, it's fantastic. It's kind of like Japan's equivalent of the BMW M3 that we spoke about earlier today, but at the same time this one is more, in fact very much more, like the Porsche 911 GT3, or even more so a GT3 RS. It's that pure track focused car, as I mentioned earlier on. Now, when it comes to aftermarket cars, they can often be treated in kind of weird ways in Gran Turismo Sport, especially GT Sport compared to previous games, because in the previous games they would fall under one of two categories really. They'd either have no category, like up until Gran Turismo 4 that is, and then from then on you'd have performance points. So either way, you could pretty much just take them up against normal cars whenever you wanted to. Now, that's not the same, because even though the Amuse is treated as a street car, some of them aren't. The Time Attack Subaru, for instance, despite being very similar to an aftermarket car and not like a full-on race car in a traditional sense, is Group X. Likewise with the Drift Subaru, even though that's not designed to be quick around a track at all, it's still Group X and not really allowed to take on that much. It's so much of a unicorn and a niche in its own way. This one, thankfully, is in the end classes like the Amuse, so you've got tons of usability, but at the same time, the pricing is good. It is a six-figure car, it's 100 grand, but still 100 grand for how good this is, I would say is pretty good value. Now, of course, if you've already bought one of these, and chances are most of you probably have, RX-7 fan or otherwise, even if nothing else, to see what it's like to drive, I would love to hear, of course, your thoughts down below. Do you like the car? What's your favourite thing about it, perhaps? Of course, many people want to know, what does it sound like? Is it authentic to what an RX-7 should be? Well, it's not as brappy as a 787B, of course, but it sounds authentic. It's got that higher pitched note than many of its rivals, which is always welcome to a rotary enthusiast, myself included. So yeah, I'd say it's authentic to everything that makes the RX-7 as good as it is, but as I said, it kind of turns everything up to 11. And when it's a car that's already great, being made even better, it would be very difficult for that to be a bad thing. So as far as I'm concerned, this is a very cool addition to the game, and also I would say that I like this car a lot more in GT Sport than I did in GT6. As I said, in GT6 I rarely, if ever, used it. Now I use it primarily for two new reasons. One, the class categories make a lot more sense to give a car like this more of a chance because it's so OP for what it is, but also the livery editor. Being able to even just change the colour is a big deal for me, because even though of course you could argue it's not all that important to change the colour of a car, it's not like it makes it faster, but at the same time it kind of does in a weird sort of way, because I find, and maybe this is just me, but I find that I tend to perform better in a car that I enjoy driving, and part of the enjoyment of driving for me is enjoying the look of the car. So the fact that I enjoy looking at this one more, in a weird kind of way, makes me feel like I'm actually driving faster in it, and that could be psychosomatic, but it seems to me like it's got a little bit of truth in there. Overall though, as I said, tell me your thoughts down below. I think it's a cool addition to the game, and GT Sport doesn't have a massive amount of aftermarket cars, even though the previous games in the franchise had tons of them. So it's pretty cool to see a new one, and it could be an interesting rivalry to take this up against, for instance, the Amuse S2000, which is a very OP car in its own sense, up there with the Porsche GT3 easily. Overall though, that's it for my thoughts. I'll see you guys next time, and of course, for now, as always, thanks for watching.